any of these things I'm talking about are at all easy. I don't think they're easy tasks. I don't think university can just say, okay, we'll do it. It's fine. These are all difficult, and that's true of the educating and training to high quality, the specialist workers we need. And then there's a fourth role, which I think in my own mind has gone up the agenda in recent years, which is creating a general intellectually engaging climate and culture across societies that promotes the virtues of understanding and science. It seems to me important that the classic values of universities, of understanding science, of applying the scientific method, trying to understand what's going on, having a proposition, testing it, looking at it again, is particularly important in an area where some very senior politicians around the world seem to say that science doesn't matter, and you talk about fake news in some kind of way, who denigrate experts sometimes. I would say that science and understanding, the general intellectually engaging climate, respect as a core element of it, this kind of society is a society which gives us the best possibilities of addressing the challenges of the future. And the universities, I would say, have a particular responsibility. So, Coy, what I'm going to do is take those four subjects and go slide by slide through a more substantial discussion of each of those moments. And the first of those is research, understanding and interpreting. And what I suggested here for the context of this meeting, the East African community, is partly what Mike said earlier, the East African narrative of university contribution to progress. It's important to be clear that as East Africa and your countries, particularly your 6 countries in the EAC, but also more widely, have developed, coming through away from colonialism and so on, universities have played an important role. They have made a contribution to progress. You need to assert that's true, to demonstrate how that's true, to gain support and understanding for the view that you have an important role to play. I'm certainly not an expert on the history of your university, certainly nothing like to the extent which all of you are. But I know very well that in some of the countries, the situation of the universities has been very difficult at certain moments of this history. And I think explaining that history is important. And why? Because I would say for your universities, it's extremely important to assert the African dimension in the world context. Why do I say that? The truth is, there's an Anglo-American, Anglophone, European dominance in many ways of the understanding of the world of what is knowledge and how do we operate. That results from the end of the Second World War, World War II, through till very recently, where the ways of thinking that have dominated the way the world has worked has come from a relatively small, geographically speaking, part of the world and has tended to dominate thinking. It has been the place where many people in Africa, Mike, you mentioned your own history in this, have themselves been educated. And I don't decry it at all. I think it's a fantastic contribution, which a British person like myself should feel proud of, and it's been a very important contribution to the world. I don't withdraw from that in any way. But there is a very important African dimension that needs to play its role in this. And so when you're looking at the economy, for example, and going back to this point about understanding and interpreting, what is the story of the economy of Africa? How has that evolved over centuries? Where is it going? What are the competitive strengths of African society and African individuals in being able to meet the economic challenges of the future? Is Africa fated simply to copy, in some sense, what's been done in other countries, the former colonial powers, or the United States of America, or China, or whatever it might be? Or can it develop its own contribution? Now, I know it's already doing that, and I'm speaking certainly to the converted in saying this, but I do think you need to assert the African economic dimension in the world context. What is the economic future of Africa? What is the particular contribution that Africa can bring to the prosperity of the world and how it operates? These are big questions. I'm putting the questions, which is easy, not giving the answers, which is difficult. But the point is that African universities need to really find ways of thinking about those questions and saying Africa has a major contribution to make in these ways. And that applies to the particular sub thinking about the place of work. It's not just the economy in general, but it's the place of work. How is work going to operate? With artificial intelligence, with a whole set of different skills required, what is work going to look like in Africa, in Nairobi, or in Dar es Salaam? What are going to be how are people going to be working? What is the society going to look like? What is the form of society? What should we be trying to create as a society which can look to the future in that way? And of course, culture and history. I think one of the great sadnesses of the way that the world has developed, the thinking, the thought process in the world, is some of Africa's unique contribution, and I do mean unique contribution to the history of humankind, coming from East Africa in particular, is given insufficient value in the history of the world as we think about where things were. And you have expertise and knowledge and understanding. There are all kinds of post-colonial issues at the moment. There's a massive issues going on in Britain around the Black Lives Matter movement, about how we should deal with our culture and our history, and issues about artifacts which were stolen from the African continent at various points by the British and are now displayed in various parts of Britain. How should we be dealing with that history in an effective and positive way? And I do think the reason I put all of these subjects in this box, research, understanding and interpreting, which was the first of the three roles of the universities, is I would say there is a very particular role for African universities, in this context for East African universities, to say, how are we going to tell our story of the African dimension of all these things? It's not simply a question of looking at what research is being done elsewhere in the world and applying it to African conditions. It's a question also saying, what is the African contribution in all of these ways? Now, it's a complicated and difficult process, but I think it's an important part of those goals which the EAC and the African Union set out in their declarations for the future about the self-confidence of the country, of the continent and of its peoples. So I would say that is very important. So I think the research dimension, there is a specific African dimension which is important. And I then come to the next slide, harnessing this research for general benefit. Here, this is a very difficult question because some people in universities are skeptical about any wider social obligation of universities. We introduced in Britain, I did when I was Secretary of State of Education in Britain, the idea of assessing impact was the word used of research. For research to be funded by the government, it would need to demonstrate its impact on wider society. And many academics said, impact, what's that? It's nothing to do with us, how our research is used. It's nothing to do with the wider society. We have a right to kind of think deep thoughts, and that's it. I've never agreed with that. I think research should have a practical component more widely. And so the question of harnessing it to general benefit is particularly important. There are lots of very particular examples. I've mentioned a couple of them. The climate change, artificial intelligence, the pandemics, the aging society or the younging society. But what's the demographic profile of the society going to be? How is migration affecting what's happening for a variety of different reasons, and so on? The society needs answers to how we can best address these challenges. We shouldn't just leave it to political leaders and industrial leaders. You need an informed, science-based approach. So I say that in that research element, it's necessary to focus on problem solving and knowledge about how to address change. That needs to be a component of an individual's research. And you can write that in at the very beginning of a research project to say, how are we going to deal with these problems? One needs to try and get strong relationships outside the university with employers, with public and private sector employers, with a wide range of different organizations, to look at what the future of these activities is and what skills are going to be needed, and to develop local research and knowledge to transfer to have the biggest impact in those areas. those relationships aren't always there. They're often a kind of sniffy relationship, I think, between employers and universities, where employers think universities are getting on with the rather low-grade business of making money, and employers think that universities are getting on with a rather distant and vague aspect of thinking things. It's not good enough either approach. You've got to find an engaged approach to talk about the various issues which there are there. And that applies to the university contribution to the public and governmental ambitions. I do think you are fortunate in East Africa in having EAC Vision 2050. As you go through the document, you can see the wide range of different dimensions of society which the Vision 2050 tries to address. And each of them raises the question to universities, what can universities contribute to fulfilling that vision, whether it's better transport systems, better places of work, better caring systems, better social care, whatever it might be. And the EAC vision gives you an agenda for which universities can go through subject by subject and say, okay, what's our capacity in the universities in the East African community to be able to offer some research which can help get us to a better place in achieving those ambitions. And that's, I think, a fairly straightforward process to go through. Again, easy to state, much more difficult to achieve. And then finally, I suggest here promoting research networks in the EAC. I think that's just a worthwhile thing, which I think you already do in a variety of different ways, but I just thought I would mention it. So the third university function is education and training to high quality. And here I think the main point I want to emphasize is flexibility. Universities have worked in very traditional ways for a course for a certain amount of time, students coming in a certain type of way, forms of education which are traditional and convention type. What these changing situations mean, in my opinion, is we need far greater level of flexibility in offering new modes of study. So is it simply the lecture theatre, the essay? Is it online by a variety of different means? Is it seminars by Zoom meetings such as this? What are the types of modes of study that will work best? Now, there won't be a best system. It's a question of having a variety of good systems and trying to fit them to what the students are looking for and what the others are about. Excuse me. But it's a question of trying to be flexible and offer new modes of study. Similarly, the structure of courses. There's already a wide range of different types of course, different lengths. Is it 3 years? Is it 1 year? Is it sandwich course working with industry and employer? What are the different forms of course structure that could operate? And the modes of delivery as well. So fundamentally, flexibility, including the ability of people to start university courses at different points in their lives. There are many people who will have missed out on the opportunity of universities early in life, who might very well be able to benefit later in life by taking a university course and coming in for the sake of argument at the age of 40, or studying a part-time course where the learning that they're doing is principally part-time, side by side with their work, rather than principally a full-time study option. And flexibility in what can be offered is very important. And if I may say so, Coy, I think it's something where the EAC universities, the whole organization, which you are, is in a good position to coordinate and bring together shared approaches in these areas. So giving students a wider range of options for deciding what they want to do and how they want to do it. Whatever system of study you establish needs also to have a system of accreditation which is agreed with the relevant professional bodies. So if you're going to be an engineer, an architect, a doctor, a nurse, whatever it may happen to be, there needs to be a system which makes sure that the university study is accredited and linking with the professional bodies. So you don't have to go through another set of qualifications, another set of processes to be able to deal with it. And it is, as I said earlier, lifelong. It's a question of retraining, updating, continuous professional development throughout life. If you're qualified as a teacher today at the age of 22, you will require a whole different set of skills in 38 years' time when you hit the age of 60. So question, to what extent can you update your skills? That's even more true in fields like medicine and nursing, where that's the case. It's true in fields like agriculture, where the techniques move forward in different ways. So can you have an upgrading approach? I do put in here also pastoral care, because I think that there is a question in this very tense world of ensuring students get support in trying to address the challenges they themselves face in life. So I think getting an element of pastoral care. And then, of course, access and pre-university courses is very important to enable a wider range of people to go to university. Now, this is a very challenging slide. I've put it very simply with just these 5 bullet points on the approach, but each of the bullet points is complicated and difficult, and I would say sets an agenda for what you as universities can be thinking about for the future, both for your own university, but also for universities working with others. So I now come to the fourth role of universities, which is the creating the strong intellectual climate that I think is so important. And that's very much an aspect that I was talking about earlier, which I think has gone up the agenda in recent times. I do think it's about leadership and governance of universities. Some university leaders are very good. I used to play a game when I was Secretary of State for Education, looking at 150 universities in Britain. How many were in the best 50? How many were in the worst 50? And trying to work out what the Vice Chancellors thought of all of those various points. And they varied in quality. But universities have to be ruthless with governance structures which enable them to do that, to move forward. Ben, could you possibly move on to the next slide, please? It's the creating strong intellectual, thank you very much, creating the strong intellectual climate. So it's the leadership and governance of universities, which have to be ready to be strong and consultative, not dictatorial, but at the same time decisive. It's a very difficult ask. And you're trying to build within the universities diverse and respectful university communities. We live in a world where there's fashion can take over and certain types of thinking can completely dominate and exclude others. That's not a good thing at the end of the day. You need to have a situation where people are able to think lightly, are able to share their views in confidence, where they know, where everybody needs to know, and I emphasize that word respectful, that the fact that other people's views are respected even if you disagree with them. And that's that's an important and difficult line to draw and process to achieve. You need to take that more widely into local civic and community engagement with the local society more generally, and you need to develop a local community strategy, both on industry plus civic. So what is the future of a particular town, a particular community? Where is it going to be in the future? The university needs to play a central role into that area. So those are the 4 functions of universities which I particularly wanted to highlight. As I said, and I emphasize it again, the fact is, and we all know, that these are all difficult, and maybe we'll discuss it more in this webinar this morning. But the next slide is about the hard thing, resources. How do you pay for it all? Universities are under great financial pressure most of the time. And I think there's a whole set of different ways in which you can think about funding. Mike mentioned in his introduction the advent of private universities into the university system of East Africa a moment ago. And so the traditional model is not always, doesn't always have to be followed, but I identify here 5 different potential sources of resources for universities. First is the state, the government, in whatever funding they put in. Secondly is the individual student in fees they pay to go to university. Third is the employer, and which certainly in the UK system pays far less than it ought to. There should be far more contribution by employers to university costs. Fourth is philanthropy, and it's quite difficult to develop that if there's not a well-established alumni base, but you can do something. And then there's international support. So Mike mentioned DFID earlier on. whether that's in money or in kind. Now, those 5 sources of resources need to be thought about in that context. It's quite striking. We list in the book, second commercial, in going through this, the wide variety across countries of the extent to which of the different levels of funding which come from different sources. It's quite surprising. You'd think that countries from broadly similar positions would have a broadly similar type of amount of money coming from the government as opposed to the individual student. It's not the case. There's a very wide variety of different areas of financial support. I'm not expert enough in your countries to know what the right balance is, or to even make sensible comments about what the right balance is. But what I do know is going back to the basics of analysing what these 5 sources can give for targets that you want to do is really worth thinking about. Linking the sources back to the roles of the university is important. It may well be much easier to get support for educating and training people than for some aspects of research or for civic engagement. And you can look, there may be different types of partnership between the university and potential funders to deal with particular challenges that the university is taking place. But I think as an exercise for your community to discuss what are the potential sources and what could be done in this area, it's an interesting and worthwhile exercise. I work with a group of universities internationally, which is trying to do give some more financial support for universities in Africa. And I think it is a very interesting thing to think how we can discuss what could be done. I think there are resources to be mobilized, but it requires thinking what's it for and how will it be run? Will it be run well to carry it through? So on the next slide, the penultimate slide of this presentation, I just talk about universities and their partners needing to be able to address these issues around. Ben, if you could put up the next slide, that'd be great, please. Yes, universities and their partners. And what we're trying to achieve is universities with their range of different partners, governmental employers, civic organizations, charities, and so on, international organizations. Ben, could you possibly put up the next slide, please? No, not at the moment. Okay, well, I'll say it. Oh, there we are. Thank you very much, Ben. Understanding change in East Africa, that's the single most important thing. What's going on in East Africa? Understanding that we're talking 30 years into the future, not 30 years back in the past. Working out what those challenges of the future are. What are the real difficult problems that have to be sorted out, whether they're scientific, social, or whatever it might be. Thirdly, providing the skills of the future, ensuring that universities are educating and training people in the skills that will make the future succeed. Promoting creativity and intelligence to deal with these various issues. And I think particularly it's been brought home to us in these COVID period. Resilience, resourcefulness, innovation. How can universities help build a resilient, resourceful, innovative society? And then finally, promoting the values of a strong society. So my final slide, Ben, if you could put up the final slide, please. Reaching East Africa 2050. Looking forward, not back, future, not the past, trying to get consistent focus and leadership. And here I do think your community of universities has a real strength compared to other parts of the continent. You can have dialogue, work together and say how across our 6 countries can we develop focus and leadership on those key challenges. How do you get wider support and engagement from governments, from businesses, from international organizations for what you're trying to do? And how do you build these partnerships so they work really well? So Koi, what I've tried to do in going through this presentation, sorry I've gone a couple of minutes over my time, is just really to raise a number of questions for the universities in East Africa as to how they can ensure that the societies of which you're all a part get to 2050 with the country looking something like what you're hoping to achieve at the moment. It's an enormous challenge, but I end where I started. It's universities which have the capacity to make that change, that can make it happen. You're the best placed organizations to succeed. And if you do it well, you really have the enormous fulfillment of transforming the societies of which you're a part. Thank you again for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Charles. And the questions are coming in. You've raised a lot of good questions, and there's a robust conversation happening in the chat room. As I bring in all the other panelists, I just want confirmation that we have them all on site. Vice Chancellor Makerere University, Bwana Nang, is he available? Is he here, Prof?
Yes, he is. I can see him.
Excellent. I'm just taking a roll call. The DVC Dar es Salaam University, Professor Rutinwa, are you here? Okay, I know we have Professor Gitahi and we have Professor Margaret from Pan-African University. And I just want to check if Professor Alexandra is here. The former.
Yes, I saw.
Yes, I am.
Oh, awesome. So I just wanted to make sure you're all here as we move to the next stage of our discussion. Charles, part of the things that you said this morning that I want to just reiterate as we go into this conversation is the importance of us thinking through the purpose of why institutions were established. And that was also resonates with the comments that Professor Kuria mentioned earlier. Why were the universities established? And are the universities that we have now serving the needs of our community? And are they going to bring Africa past the precipice and into greatness? So you talked about understanding and interpreting what the changes we need to have going forward are, engaging with our societies in a way that creates a culturally relevant means of moving the change process. And I think when you mentioned cultural sensitivity in several of your slides, and us understanding what our African contribution is, that's very important. And some of the comments that I'm hoping we will have a chance to address during our question and answer time. What is the role of imposter syndrome? That is a question that has come up. And what is the role of Africans combating intellectual imperialism? How do we make the African ways of knowing and the African ways of understanding ourselves relevant on an international stage in a scientifically or an intellectual environment? So you spoke of the scientific method. I want to throw that in there, that Africans are basically storytellers. That's how we have most often transferred our information. And we are competency-based learners. When I think of the way I learned about the herbs from my grandmother, that may not always fit snugly with the scientific method, but are there other ways of knowing, ways of research, like qualitative research or mixed methods, that would allow Africans as intellectuals gain that confidence to step up onto the global stage? You also mentioned the quality of training, effective training that helps us deal with change. You mentioned problem solving, and that also takes into consideration critical thinking. And I've seen a lot of universities in the begin to teach or integrate critical thinking into their courses. How is that actually helping us solve relevant, real problems in society? And I think that might also address, your comments later might on that might also address the issue of unemployed graduates. You also finally mentioned that we must develop for ourselves as Africans an intellectual engaging climate that allows not only our culture to stand front and center, but also allow us to continue in the intellectual exercises that have that the university is known for. As we move towards the panelists, I know some of these institutions have developed what we call linkage officers or liaison officers with industry that pull together the quadruple helix, which you mentioned in your presentation, where academia, government, society, and industry work together to make sure that skills are relevant, that quality of training is happening, and that the modes of training that you spoke of, the flexibility around the modes of training is addressed in a way that helps to deliver to professionals and to deliver to society the kinds of experts, the skilled labor that we need. Finally, before I move forward to the panelists, you mentioned in your book the importance that an increased life expectancy is having now. And that leads to the comments you were making on lifelong learning. I want you to think a little bit about how do we bring in the 40-somes, the 50-some people who are 40-something years and 50-something years. They've been experts in industry, may never have gotten an academic qualification, but they have such knowledge that they're going to be living until they're 90 and 100. How do we capture that? Now, Makerere University, I believe, is one of the only universities, at least it was the first university to start mature entry. And that, in a way, has given the East African context a way to acknowledge prior learning, even where there may not be a high school certificate, to enter into several streams in the university structure. So please do make comment on that. I know the Germans do something called the industry professorship. Is it something that we would be able to do? When we do it, if we do it, how do we give accreditation and recognition for it? So I would like now to bring to the forefront our panelists. And I think I'm still looking at the chat and looking at the questions that are coming in, and we will be channeling them to the panelists. We do have a 45-minute question and answer time at the end of this session. And so I would like the panelists to go. I will give each panelist 12 minutes to make your remarks. That will give us a hedge of at least 1 minute, and then we'll be able to capture our time. So I would like to start with Professor Barnabas from Makerere University, our Vice Chancellor. First, receive our condolences on the incidents at Makerere, and we believe that the tower will be, and the building will be restored, as it's a landmark for many of us. Professor, welcome to make your remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Kibuga, for that message of sympathy. And I can assure you that most of the buildings sort of collapsed, but the tower is defiant. The tower is standing up. And I want to thank all my colleagues around the world who have been sending us messages of sympathy. Prof, I want to thank Mr. Charles Jack for his very informative presentation. And particularly, I want to comment on the issue around the importance of research. I think more than ever before, the importance of research on our continent has been brought out during this COVID time, when everybody is really struggling to find out how we can control and contain this pandemic, since apparently the rest of the world has said, let everybody cater for themselves. And I think what we have seen here at Makerere, the enthusiasm with which our researchers came out to tackle the issue of the pandemic has shown that the potential for research is extremely huge. And what really is the issue now for us is how do we prioritize research in the universities and how do we fund this research? Traditionally, our research funding has come from what Charles calls the international partners. I think until last year, 80%, maybe 90% of all our research funding was coming from international partners. It is only last year that the government started funding research directly. And probably now the funding, the component by international funders has dropped maybe to about 70%. And maybe next year it will drop further to 60% because of the continued funding by the government. But I think that is extremely important. We needed to see how we convince our governments that they need to really seriously invest in research at the universities. Now, we are about 60 universities in Uganda, and about 12 of those are government funded universities. But that research funding is coming just to Makerere. Even the other government funded universities are not getting that research funding. And so what we have done is to say, can we then involve the other universities? Because they need to develop their capacity to do research. And so we have invited the other government universities to work with us. We are actually also working with the private universities which have shown interest in research. So the researchers can write proposals, and then they can invite colleagues from the other universities. But I'm trying here to bring out the role of the more endowed universities in Africa that have got the research capacity. And I'm thinking about universities like Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and the other bigger universities in the East African region that would need to nurture the younger universities. The importance of the research being relevant to society cannot be overemphasized. With our level of research funding, it will still be a little bit difficult to compete with universities that can spend, millions of dollars on basic research, just trying to understand the behavior of nature. I think with our level of funding and with the issues that we have around us, climate change, emerging diseases, poverty, and the unemployment, we might need to utilize our resources more on what Charles says, impact the society. And probably when we get a benefactor who says, I want you to research on this other thing, that could be okay. But with the meager resources we have, I think we need to concentrate on that. I also want to react to his comments on flexibility and the continuous professional development. And I think that is where the moderator is also talking about the mature age scheme. Yes, the way our universities were set up during the colonial time basically was to provide some human resource to support the colonial governments. And that culture seemed to remain around for quite some time. It is just of recent that we have really started changing the culture and saying, no, we are not here just to produce human resource for the government. We are here to also be partners in creation of knowledge around the world and in solving the problems of society, not just the human resource issues. And so continuous professional development, I think, is extremely important, especially with the changing environments. With COVID-19, we are all saying we need to move to online education. At Makerere, we had a policy on this for a very long time, but we were not implementing it at the same speed that we wanted. Now the reality has set in, and we are all saying we must move online immediately. And we are saying in the circumstances where we had not prepared our staff to say, this is going to be the future. And now we are having to do very, urgent training of staff. We are beginning to say, how do we now manage the students who are in the rural areas who might not have access? We're trying to think on how we go around that and so on. So we need to have that flexibility. And of course, we are getting members of staff who are saying, but me, I'm used to teaching on the traditional method. I don't know how I can teach online. We are insisting, we say now this is no longer the future, but this is the reality, and everybody has to do that. So continuous professional development, I think, is extremely important. Now, the COVID-19 situation is changing a lot of things, and maybe just a comment on what Charles calls the resources and where are the resources coming from. Being a government-sponsored institution, we are not as badly affected as our colleagues who must depend on student fees. Because even as the university is closed and people are basically not doing a lot of work, apart from a few who must keep the university running, people are still getting their salaries. You see, ironically, in Uganda, I always say, even in the COVID situation, the government increased salaries. And that is something that we needed to study and say, how can they manage that when actually there are sectors where people are not getting salaries? So that might not be a big problem for now, for us as a government-sponsored university. But I think as we move towards really wanting to be part of the international community at that level in research, there will be a need for us to identify alternative sources that should supplement the funding from government, because 80% of all our funding from government actually goes to paying salaries. So we must look for funds from elsewhere to make sure that we are doing quality and impactful research, that we are keeping our infrastructure good enough for research and also for training of students and all the other activities that we are involved in. And finally, I want to also comment on the value of partnerships. Partnerships within the region and partnerships beyond the region. In the East African region, we have been lucky that we have been brought together by the Inter-University Council for East Africa. And that somehow coordinates a lot of things. But even beyond the Inter-University Council for East Africa, there has been the traditional collaboration between the three big universities, that is Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and Makerere. And we have been doing things like external examination, joint research. There's a lot of joint research that goes on beyond researchers at these universities because of that sort of traditional arrangement. But I think we need now to enhance even that in the situation where we are and look at the possibility of conducting some programs, particularly graduate programs, jointly, because we do not have the capacity at each of these universities to be independent in that area. And so I think that is something that we need to explore and exploit. And the international partnerships are invaluable. Just this accident we have had at Makerere, we are having an outpouring of sympathy from all over the world with people saying, what can we do to help? But even with the COVID, the first money we got to do for the whole country, the first money to do what we call community survey came from partners. It is the partners who sent us the test kits, universities in the UK, in the US, UK, and the Netherlands actually gave us the equipment as a university to be in charge of community surveillance for the whole country. And so, apart from, of course, the research, the joint research we have been doing with them. So, Prof.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof.
What I would like to say at the moment.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned a couple of things that are really, really important. The role of partnerships. And I want to just pick that up. You talked about the role of partnerships when it comes to research, not just public institutions with public institutions, but public institutions that have the funding, partnering with public institutions, partnering with private institutions. And I want to throw in something else, partnering with vocational technical institutions, especially when it comes to making the qualifications and the training relevant, partnering with industry. In Kenya, one of the things that we were very committed to fighting as I sit on LIWA board is that most of the industries in Kenya are still getting their R&D development, research and development done by institutions outside the country. So how do we even partner with industry to enhance research and relative applied research, hardcore research in our institutions? So that was very good to hear from you. You also mentioned the importance of working across the flexibility on how do we create new kinds of modes of learning. So you talked about the challenge that I think all universities across the world have been going through recently with the COVID challenge, is that our policies and our objectives in our strategic plans for developing virtual learning and online platforms, mobile platforms, have been there for years, but we haven't really implemented a lot of them. And so the COVID situation has been a challenge for that. And I think one of the things I'm throwing out to the entire webinar community is, how do we assess online learning very well? And I think the new technologies actually challenge the traditional modes of teaching. And I think Charles mentioned that we have to move away from the sages on the stages to the students in the chairs, moving away from the focus on teaching to a focus on learning. But how do we truly assess virtual learning, online learning, and learning in these new modes and platforms? I would like to now shift to our next panelists. Thank you very much, sir, for keeping time. I can see Makerere is good on that. I will give you also 12 minutes. Professor Rutinwa from Dar es Salaam, are you here? You will need to unmute. Yes,
Hello?
there you go. Thank you very much for joining us. I know your time is precious, as it is for most of us here. I would like you to really, in your comments, talk to us about, we know Tanzania has had a different approach in how it has handled COVID. How has that impacted the continuation of teaching and learning at your institutions, as you also make comment and respond to the message that, the presentation that Charles gave us. Karibu sana, Prof.
Thank you very much, Professor Koi, for involving us in this webinar. I would also like to join the Vice Chancellor of Makerere University to congratulate the Right Honorable Charles Clark for indeed a very informative presentation. We at the University of Dar es Salaam really appreciate this presentation because it's very much in line with what we are doing right now. The University of Dar es Salaam started on 25th October 1961. And since then, it has been trying to change, to align itself and to make sure it is relevant, its relevance to the current situation. As of now, the University of Dar es Salaam is guided by what is called Vision 2061, and which has a lot of resonance with the presentation, with the presentation that has been made this morning. Can you hear me? Can you? Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. Vision 2061 commits the university to be a leading center of intellectual wealth, spearheading the quest for sustainable and inclusive development. And our mission is to advance economic, social, and technological development in Tanzania and beyond through excellent teaching and learning, research, knowledge exchange, and public service. And many of this has resonance with what has been presented this morning. Our core functions are very much the same as have been presented by Right Honorable Clark, which are teaching and learning, research, and knowledge exchange. Our Strategies involve also mobilization of resources to achieve these ends. And really our challenge revolves around what was his last, more or less the last slide, paying it all. Like our brothers or sisters Makerere, the University of Dar es Salaam is a public university, and when it started, it was funded 100% by the state with some donor inputs. But as years went by, that funding has become quite inadequate to fulfill our needs. So we are trying to diversify. I've noted the proposed other sources of funding for higher education. Some of those would be very challenging for Tanzania in our situation. For example, students. Most of our students still come from very poor families, which really they themselves need support. So they will not be in a position to make a significant contribution towards supporting education. Philanthropy has been mentioned. Given our level of development and our background as a formerly socialist state, there isn't really a big private sector state which can do philanthropic giving. So really our sources of funding as of now still remain the state as well as some international supports. So what are we doing about this at the University of Dar es Salaam? One, we have devised a strategy to tap into our own internal resources, to use internally generated resources for the purposes of supporting our functions and our mission. For example, with effect from just last year, the University of Dar es Salaam decided to set up its own scholarship fund. Previously, either you are funded by the government or by a donor or by yourself if you can. Now the University of Dar es Salaam has started awarding merit scholarships and in fact also scholarship for students in need, and we have set up funds for that. Also, the University of Dar es Salaam has decided to start funding its own research itself. Currently, the amount we have set aside is not big. It's about $1 million, over 2 billion Tanzanian shillings, but this is just a start. So I'm trying to share this experience so that maybe other universities may also consider funding their own research. But we are also trying to develop partnerships with industry where we can. For example, currently we have a 10-year agreement with the Barrick Gold Tanzania, under which they will put in some $10 million into supporting various activities of the University of Dar es Salaam. So this is what we are trying to do about addressing the question of how do you pay for your vision. I have been asked also to talk about how Tanzania responded to COVID-19 and what does that mean for higher education. The response of the University of Dar es Salaam to COVID, as well as other universities, was very much aligned to the national response. As I'm sure you are all aware, here in Tanzania, the government did not impose a lockdown. However, perhaps the education sector was the only exception where you would say there was some form of a lockdown because all education institutions were closed down on 13th March and universities reopened on 1st June and secondary schools later. So there was some sort of lockdown when it comes to university. However, during that time, we made preparations to be able to receive students and conduct our academic activities safely. Among other things, we started working on introducing online teaching because we didn't know when students would come back. Already, the university currently has a 5-year rolling strategic plan, 2020 to 2025, which had set a goal of all academic programs going online by 2013. We decided to bring forward that deadline to this year. So as we are speaking, we have teams working to ensure that all our academic programs can be offered online by the start of next year, although we have resumed classes. But also we invested in research. COVID-related interventions, which included sanitary equipment, but also some medication for complications related to COVID. For example, we made sanitizers. We also produced some concoctions that could help people who have suffered some respiratory diseases. We call it Fukiza. So, and it has worked since when we resumed studies on the 1st of June until when we closed the semester some 1 week ago. We didn't suffer any case of, any fatal case of which is COVID related. So I believe the approach in Tanzania is working, and we welcome anyone who wants to learn from our experience to join us. I have been given 12 minutes. I would not want to take too much time. Maybe I will respond to some of the questions should they come my way. Thank you very much. Let me end here for the time being.
Thank you very much, Prof. And indeed, we are here for knowledge sharing and learning from one another. So thank you for the invitation to come and learn from how you were able to address the issue. One of the things that you mentioned is that we need to continue as part of your mission at the University of Dar es Salaam to provide relevant real-time training for our graduates. And I can see on the chat room, there's a lot of conversation around, are we delivering relevant graduates? Are we training job seekers or job creators? Are we really linking in with innovation? And what is the role of innovation in changing the way our graduates think about their role in society? Are our graduates, or are the graduates of Dar es Salaam able to really engage with their communities? Or do our graduates have the government mentality that since I went to university, I must therefore get a job? And I think VC of Makerere mentioned that we have to move away from training clerks for the government to training skilled workers for our communities. So as we come back to you during the question and answer time, Prof, please think about those comments and those sentiments. The other thing that I think I would like to challenge you to think about as well as the other panelists, and this was mentioned in Charles's presentation, how are we enhancing diversity at the university across its governance structures? And how are we then also increasing and improving our student population? So how are we working to enhance diversity in our governance structures, in our human capital at the universities, and how is it reflected in our student population as they come in? And with that, I wanted to mention, I don't know if I'm sure most of you have seen online, in social media, the slides that are going around looking at the countries that have been led by women and how effectively they dealt with COVID versus countries that have been led by men. Of course, there aren't that many, but it might inform us and might even give us an opportunity for research as we go through. I would like to now welcome our next panelist. Thank you very much, who is Professor Kiama Getahi from Nairobi University. Nairobi University is the oldest university in Kenya for us. And I'm eager to see how is Nairobi University leveraging its history, its capacity for the future. What are you doing, Professor Getahi, at Nairobi University to leverage itself for the next 50 years? What is the thinking? What are the policies? And how are you engaging with change management and creating change management part of your culture, looking forward to the next 50 years? Professor Getahi? Prof, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. And thank you, Professor Koi. Thank you, Mike, for reaching out so that we could also come here and contribute. I'm happy also to be here as one of the panelists with the other members, including my counterpart, Mudhui and Margaret Barnabas Nawangwe. The presentation by Charles Clark was excellent. I think as I was listening, it brought to mind one very important issue, and that is who would suffer if the university was closed? If that university, whether it's University of Nairobi or it's Makerere or it's Dar es Salaam or any other university, that it was just closed here. And who would actually care? Because I think his presentation tried to address all those issues. And if those issues are not addressed in the manner that he was proposing, then you would find that it would be hard to find who would care. Maybe the workers in the university who would lose jobs, yeah. And that would be dangerous. I think as Mike, you talked about that you're thinking about the strategic plan for the universities, community for the next 5 or so years. I think that is the biggest question. Have the university lived true to their original mandate? Yeah. Why they were established? And are they today doing what they are supposed to do? And are they preparing themselves for the future? In this country, I think there is some time we had a problem with government. I think 1991 thereabout. And the president at that time, President Moi, just left us alone. And he said that the university scholars have so much time. They're asking for more money. Why can't they use for the time they have to look for money elsewhere? And we closed for 1 year. And I think the country, what I could feel, I was young staff then, just been hired. And therefore, you could not feel, the country was not reverberating with us. You could feel, even as you have closed and you have gone away, there was really no, and it is because perhaps we did not have such what we are having today to reflect as a university. What are we doing? Would the world at large care? Would the local communities care? Maybe the students, because they have lost an year. But even those who lost an year, they came back and continued with their studies. Yeah. So that is the biggest issue. Who would care? Who would suffer? I think I would just summarize his presentation in that context. And if we reflected on that, then we would be able to get the university of the future. He addressed a number of things which he categorized by beginning with talking about their visions. We wanted to have a prosperous and people-driven, and the university being at the core of this. How are the universities dealing with the change? And the University of Nairobi has tried a bit during even the COVID, the disruption. And when the president declared that all education institutions should close, we actually closed for just about two weeks. And by that time, I was just thinking and wondering, what next? There are those who say, COVID, and I just thought that the university should, in the first instance, be able to give hope and the faith to the people. And if we just close and go home, just like a primary school has done, a secondary school has done, then that is not university. And we pride on innovation. We pride on commitment as our values. That students will complete their program, we will teach them, we will do this. and that we will use innovative ways. So I called back Senate, and we were able to reflect on what we require to give hope and faith to the Kenyan people. And we went back. We used the technology that we had, and we moved to virtual learning for all our programs, postgraduate, undergraduate program, including the defenses of the theses, and the projects. And as a result, we are able to graduate. We will have graduation tomorrow. We were able to admit a new cohort of students, and we have not lost any of our academic year. Because of that as a university, we say, first and foremost, we must be able to give faith and hope to our Kenyan people. Now, when you reflect why the universities were formed, and that has been, he has also talked about it in terms of the issue of the high quality universities, the issue of the universities of the future, the university age. The first mandate is obviously quality university education. But quality university education that is relevant. Relevance is also very important. And how do we make it relevant? Do we make it relevant by using the same methods that we were using before? Today, most of the knowledge is easily available online. Are we teaching students the same method that we used to teach them before? We come before the classroom and then tell them these are the diseases and these are the clinical signs you see, or engineering, we do the same thing. Is it the same thing? How do we revisit this whole thing and start looking at how can the student be taught how to search for knowledge, to be creative, to be critical thinkers, as we are talking about high quality education that is also relevant to today. In fact, you find some of the students, actually, the young people go to the university and they are dropping out because they listen to the teacher and they don't know what they are talking about because that material is already available. And they will think that actually they will read it later and they will understand it. Then it turns out to be a bit complex when they do that. So they fail. Many of them, you find they are doing supplementaries and all this because they say this information that I have to attend classes from morning to evening is actually available. Can we now meet them somehow by making it relevant, by packaging it perhaps in experiential learning or perhaps into problem-based? And that will require a culture change. I think he mentioned the issue of culture also. How do we change our scholars? And you know, many of them have been there since the universities were formed in 1950. And some others were hired there later. So the way they were taught is the only way they know. How do we change them so that they can meet? Because they say, oh, these students are not coming to my class. I remember one time in my administrative role in the lower level, I had introduced Wi-Fi even in lecture theaters. And one time, one of the faculty board met there, and they said that this Wi-Fi, which is in lecture theater, is interrupting students from listening because they are searching on mobile phone. I think Mike, you talked about the issue of mobile phone. They are checking on mobile phone. As I'm teaching them, they are also checking. And they need just to listen to me as the person is presenting PowerPoint, and he wants to see the student writing what they are presenting. And they are saying, this one is already here. And what they were proposing is, can I then remove the Wi-Fi? And that was quite shocking because the thing is, the information is there. What is it you are doing? If you probably gave them the problem, they would have searched the knowledge and come and have a discussion with you. Yeah. So that is how do we make our education more relevant? And how do we ensure that the universities go beyond access? Because many of them could have been established to offer degrees in the various areas. When you read at the foundation of University of Nairobi, And the discussion that was there at that time was to see how do we ensure that students can get degrees. But today, you can get degrees virtually. You can register in some other university in another place. Why do you have to register in Makerere? Why do you have to register in the University of Nairobi? It must be that other value that is added to you, that you can be able to solve problems, your own problems, and that you can be able to solve the problems you see and you encounter in your community. How can we, as universities of today and in the future, create an innovation culture in our universities? We have many students who are graduating with PhDs and masters. Are those people just graduating with PhD and masters for their own promotion? Or is it the knowledge they are bringing, they are generating knowledge for use? And Charles Clark has also already mentioned this, that he does not completely agree with the concept where you just think and publish and do for just that sake. It must be perhaps for also addressing societal problems so that other people can see the value you bring on the table. Mm. We have been confronted with the issue of COVID, and there is another reflection we have to think about even now, that, and Professor Nawangwe mentioned about this, what the discussion that was in Makerere, it was also there in the University of Nairobi. The issue of availability of internet to our students wherever they are, to our teachers wherever they are, not only what is available in the university. We know that education, to a large extent, sometimes is taken in the context of the social pillar. But I would want to think about this also in terms of creating bridges. Those students were away, we were here, or we were in our homes. How do we reach them? We could only reach them through technology, through internet. To what extent has the government woken up to realize that there is need for investments in this infrastructure for availability of internet, to create the bridge between the scholar or the researcher with the student, even at home? He doesn't need to travel to crowd in a classroom, the university of the future in the next 50 years. How we use so much money to create roads and to create big bridges, physical bridges. So there's a lot of money put in that infrastructure. But how much are we putting on the internet to create the bridges between our scholars and our students? That a student, your voice does not need to come here. So thank you very much. I want to that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Prof. You raised some very important questions. Yes. How much investment are universities and governments putting into creating a bridge across the technology divide? That has been the biggest problem. And we've seen it not just in Kenya or in East Africa, we've seen it even in the US, in other countries, where the infrastructure is still divided along economic lines. You've also raised the issue of how do we integrate problem-based learning, experiential learning into the new modes of instruction? The question I'm now placing back to you is, how are you assessing that? You've also mentioned continuous professional development. You alluded to it in saying a lot of our instructors or professors just publish for promotion, yet their teaching or their ability to engage learners is stagnated. How are we as universities, as the regulator, demanding that our professors, our staff, continue with professional development? And I think Charles also made a comment about that in his presentation. And you can see on the chat room, that comment is reiterated throughout the comments that we're seeing. How are we engaging? How is Nairobi University, Makerere, Dar es Salaam, PAC engaging with industry, engaging with relevant learning? How are we developing relevant learning objectives? Have we thought through our curriculum design. And one of the frustrations I know some of the universities have is that unfortunately some of our regulators are behind the curve. National regulators are behind the curve. I remember having to fight a war about whether books should be in the library or should they be available online. And our regulator at the time was demanding 5 copies of every book on the shelf. Yet the books were available online. So as we are coming through to the answer and question time, I would like you to reflect on your contribution to some of those comments. I would like to move to our next presenter, and our next presenter is Professor Margaret from Park University, and she's representing a rather large constituent that unfortunately sometimes we overlook, and which is the private sector. Prof, I was very enamored by your comments that you sent earlier to me, and I won't give a spoiler, so I would let you just run with it, and you have 12 minutes. Karibu, Professor Margaret.
Thank you, Professor Coy, and also thank you, a lot of thanks to Right Honorable Charles Clark for the presentation that he made. Thank you also IUCA community for organizing for this meeting. It's wonderful when as East African region, we're able to share our thoughts and experiences and challenge one another on the way forward, especially as guided by some of the documents and some of the thinking, the strategic thinking for the East African region. So thank you very much for this. As a person representing the private universities, I'm honored to share a few thoughts. The Kenyan sector of the private universities does have a body that enables it to convene and converge constantly, talking to one another. Even when we were going through some of the issues like COVID and on, conversations help us a lot to know how to support one another and navigate what we are going through, even outside COVID. That has been part of the tradition of our private universities. And I'm glad that many of the private universities are getting stronger by the day as we engage some of the things that we come across. But today it's not so much about the challenges that universities face, but I think it's really engaging these matters that have been raised by Charles Clark. And so allow me to just mention a bit of that, engage some of the things that he has mentioned, which I thought were very interesting, and then also become a storyteller, because stories are part of how we engage society. Let me mention something. I am very encouraged by his approach to the conversations that he had. At no point did he look down on social sciences, because many times in spaces like this, I have been surprised that society seems to lift the sciences at the expense, talk very positively of the sciences at the expense. I think society actually needs both. We need the whole round developments in the sciences, developments in the social sciences, because a lot of our aspirations as human are often expressed in ways that when you look at it is there's a lot of affinity to the social science world. So even what he mentioned on their aligned ambitions, if you look at them, at the end of the day, it's about people getting better. So I found it very encouraging from the social science perspectives that indeed we can make a contribution in terms of innovation, in terms of managing change, in terms of building people, so that people can then drive the futures that we're looking at. So that I want to really appreciate in the presentation of Honorable Charles Clark. Talking about high quality universities, again, it's really the same thing, the psychosocial, the issues of values. And some of us in private universities, actually quite a number of our private universities are more into the social sciences, and therefore the contribution to values, the things people believe, parts of the person, the psychologies and on, are very critical in society. And so when we put our hands to the plow and work on those, is because we believe it actually contributes significantly to what goes on in society. When people that we work with and develop and be, facilitate their development, so to speak, get that right, then at this, you are bound to have a society that holds together. It's like the glue that holds together. His comments on research I found were very interesting, and especially the challenge to get our own African voice and perspectives part of the mainstream engagement, conversations that go on in research. I think that is a very significant thing, that if we can find ways that we encourage our researchers to not to be apologetic about the perspectives they have. Coming from social sciences, again, I find that sometimes when we're dealing with mainstream literature, there's a tendency to brush aside the perspectives of the African persons. And so one way we have found best way to respond to this is especially at strengthening the graduate level studies. Graduate level studies and encouraging students to express what they think and support what they think in ways that are scientific. It really, really helps, because then when we have strong graduate studies and students and research, all that goes together, then that feeds back to the way we teach in the lower levels, the undergraduate levels. So we can significantly make a contribution, at least in Park University. Graduate studies has become one of the main areas of our quest in growing the institution. So we've started graduate programs, master's levels and PhD levels in many of our programs, so that you then develop people that are able to defend the perspectives that they see, the realities they have, that they know works and actually needs to be contribute to mainstream knowledge. And then also the publishing by those scholars, encouraging scholars, having institution-based journals that we support. We actually finance those so that people they are refereed journals, but they are able to publish in some of those and externally as well. So I'm just saying that bit of research and problem solving research that engages problems in societies and things like that are very, very right on target. But our own graduate programs need to be strengthened in our institutions. There's one mention that he mentioned about and I think several of my colleagues have mentioned this bit about lifelong learning. This is something that some of our regulators are way behind, at least in my own country, where in our structures we had mature entry. Until not too long ago, about 10 years ago, we were told, no, it doesn't work, because something about the structures they have doesn't allow for that. And we begged to allow it to stay in our programs until such time that we understand the place of long life learning, because there's a lot that people who are out there, who are not in school systems, can contribute to knowledge. But let me put a twist to this, that if we are going to appreciate that, we need also to appreciate the matter of language, how language confines us to walk in. It's as though when you have English, or allow me to say French, then you can contribute to lifelong learning in our context. And I think that is a misnomer, something really wrong that we need to correct. Aspects of translation, allowing people to express knowledge in the language they're so comfortable with and translating, needs to be bigger in our region. And I'm hoping that one of these days, Park University will pioneer that. There are institutions in Africa that really pioneer that, but not outside the academia. We have it in like Bible Society, for example, but in academia, we're still very shy about that, yet it holds the key. In fact, recently, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o accepted something in Gikuyu, and he was, there's nothing wrong in that. And I think he was just making a point. It's not that he doesn't have the English. Let me come to the last before I quickly talk very in 1 minute about what we are doing in the university, but I'll combine it with this one. Professor Clark mentioned something about international partnership, and some of our colleagues have mentioned that. Indeed, even for Park University, engaging international partners have helped us in developing programs or mirroring some of our programs with what they have, and not necessarily aping theirs, but benefiting from what they have seen. Some of our programs have been developed in that way. And then more recently, even supporting us on a dream we've had for a long time, as we saw where the future was going in terms of offering of knowledge and education, we knew we needed to go online for a long time. So we started on our journey on online learning about 15 years ago with one program which was very successful. We went to another program and on, and they are accredited by our regulators. And then we resourced significantly in terms of library, in online learning, online material, and in terms of the platforms that we needed. And I must say the international partners supported us. Friends of Park University supported us on that. So when COVID arrived, we were ready to roll over. In fact, by that time, policies had been put in place to get as many members of the university, faculty and students, to be acquainted with online learning. So this is my story now. When COVID arrives, we knew exactly where we were going and how to do it. But persuading the human beings to get everybody to come on board was our task for April 2020. We spent a lot of that time. And some of the students and staff who had gone ahead to use the tools that we had, they supported us so much as champions. And so the training of one another was in-house, and it was so dynamic. It was just fantastic, to the extent that we started May on bank, just as planned, and we have finished one trimester fully online, even doing our exams online, and all the meetings, any meeting you wanted, you could do them online using the platforms that we have, using Zoom, and also collaborate in using Blackboard, the tool, the platform that we use. I just want to say that it's been encouraging to roll on what we had thought, what we had planned, and that we are now in the second semester moving on in online learning. So I wanted to just share that story of Park University. We've learned a lot in supporting one another. We've learned a lot in benchmarking from external organizations. And some of our programs are running very, very well. Up to the PhD level, all the levels we are able to do. Let me just say this 1 minute, Koi, that we are still thinking through, how do we do the practicums? Yeah, because that's still a challenge. I have 2 courses that we still must crack that. I'm told by some of the lecturers, they have managed to know how to do the practicums in psychology to a measure, but we need to still crack that. Practicals in ICT, we're still cracking that. So we're still on a journey, on a learning journey as an institution. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Margaret. You have a very compelling story. You've mentioned a couple of things that I'd like to just bring back to the conversation. You spoke about language and the confines of language. And again, I want to take that back to Clark, and I hope you'll be able to comment on this. African ways of knowing and African ways of telling. A lot of our institutions are still colonial in their perspective of what knowledge is and how it is generated. So how do we combat intellectual imperialism? You've also spoken about your partnerships with international bodies. And what I like about that, Professor Margaret, is that if a PAC student is working with a scholar from another institution and they're jointly working on a research project, that other scholar has to recognize the African voice and the African perspective. And in publishing together jointly, then that would give visibility to the African voice and the African ways of knowing. So thank you very much for that. You also have talked about the fact that Park University has had a continuous change process happening, so that when a challenge came, it was not hard to lean on your champions. So I think that was very important. And Charles also mentioned that. How do we integrate changes of processes of change into our cultures as institutions? Now, I want to go back to our
You're muted, Koi, you're muted.
Goodness, I've been muted all this time.
No, just
Okay. So I'd like to pull in our last panelist, and I would like to remind all of you that we did start half an hour into when we wanted to. So I would like to ask for your indulgence to give us at least a half hour for your questions and responses. I would like to ask Professor Alexandra Liababaje to make some comments if he's online. Prof?
Thank you, Professor. I would like first to thank Prof. Mike for organizing this webinar and inviting me to be part of this webinar. And I would like to thank the Right Honorable Charles for his great presentations, and also colleagues who shared the ideas before me. Here we are talking about reshaping higher education in East Africa in line with East African Community Vision 2050. It is a vision that has economic aspirations, political aspirations, and social aspirations. But at that level, I already ask myself a question. The vision is not for leaders. The vision is for citizens. How many of us, how many of East African community citizens are knowledgeable about this vision? And how many of us took time to strategize about our contribution to make this Vision 2050 happen? So most of the time we see countries, regions develop, even the continent, developing visions, but there is an effort that has to be made to sell that vision to partners, to stakeholders, not only to international organizations and bodies, so that we could be in a position to implement it ourselves as stakeholders. A number of concerns were identified in the process of the development of this Vision 2050. One was persistent poverty. The second one was inadequate social cohesion. A third one was lack of human capital. There is increasing unemployment, especially among the youth, and low levels of industrialization and lack of competitiveness. I just mentioned a few of them, not all of them. And this vision provided a number of approaches that would lead to the activities, to the initiatives, so that we could get rid of that poverty, we could be responding to the needs of our population. So they identified 6 pillars in this vision, including infrastructure, industrialization, agriculture, and so on. And education was seen as the first enabler for the realization of this vision. So this is where we are. If you talk about education, in particular higher education, because education is responsible for capacity development for the entire community in order to create well-educated people who will put in place all the strategies that are developed. And when you look at the targets, I was looking at the targets for education, the vision. Unfortunately, I couldn't find statistics for higher education. And this is probably informed by the fact that we do not have accurate data for higher education. And fortunately, Inter-University Council for East Africa started the development of higher education management information system so that we could be able to see where we are today and then put a target for 2050. For the time being, in the vision, there is no a target, not a single one, no a single indicator for higher education. However, there are quite good number of activities or initiatives that are supposed to take place between now and 2050. One of them is the development of human capital through enhancement of teacher training at all levels. That will inform the quality of higher education. The development of a curriculum on sustainability, development of training programs that prepare students for careers in fields related to envisaged industrialization, effective use of ICT to enhance learning outcomes, and also there is a target on systems of education to establish linkages between tertiary, vocational, and secondary, primary, and early childhood education. There is a target to harmonize education systems to facilitate mutual recognition of the qualifications. There is also a target for skills for emerging development initiatives, capacity building tailored both to present and anticipated future markets needs or markets demands. So this is in the Vision 2050 clearly mentioned. And the same vision identified a number of centers of excellence to be established. A number of universities and institutions in East Africa are earmarked to be transformed into centers of excellence in that vision. Lastly, there is also a need to develop specific skills in line with the pillars, the 5 or the 6 pillars of the vision. What I couldn't find, if we are to create jobs for the youth, is the importance of sports industry and the importance of culture industry. Prof. Margaret touched at it a little bit. When you look at worldwide industries, these are 2 areas that merit also to be taken into consideration in the near future. And all this can be achieved only if we have East African citizens. How do we make sure that we become East African citizens, not Kenyan citizen, not Ugandan citizen, not Rwandan citizen? There is, in our view, as IUCEA and higher learning institutions, a role to play to put in place a center of excellence where we could promote values of being East African, a center for regional integration in East Africa. I'd like to end my intervention by mentioning a few things. One is the mandate given to higher learning institutions in this Vision 2050 and the mandate given to Inter-University Council in this Vision 2050, so that we be aware of it and we see how we can achieve it if this vision is to be achieved by that target, by that date. The role of education institutions, in particular universities, is to mainstream research and innovation for socioeconomic transformation. How are we prepared? A number of speakers before me have elaborated a little bit more on that. And this is enshrined in our ESC Vision 2050. The role of IUCEA is to promote good practices in the management of higher education institutions. It is unfortunate that we were not able to launch the Higher Education Leadership Program of East African Community this year because of COVID-19. But this is one of the mandates given to IUCEA by the East African Community by our leaders at government level and at regional level. The second one is to coordinate the development of higher education and research in the community. How is IUCEA going to achieve this? There is a number of approaches that need to be explored. The first one is to see how we could review the financing model of universities. Studies have been done in the past, back in 2015. I think they need to be reviewed so that the financing model of universities be aligned with these priorities to cater for research, innovation, and development. There is a need, as mentioned by a number of our colleagues, to reach out to industry in order to enhance research and development departments back home in our private sector industries and businesses. And that this can be done in partnership with East African Business Council. They are very much interested to collaborate with Inter-University Council for East Africa and universities. And we hope that this partnership could be extended to private sector chambers at country levels so that we could enhance research and development involving both academia and private people. Lastly, there is a need to enhance collaboration between universities and established research institutions in partner states. We have research institutions in agriculture, in energy, in different sectors, but we work in isolation, universities on one side, research institutions on another side. So we need to look at how best we can coordinate activities of research institutions and universities at country level and at regional level. ISTECO can also play a role and work hand in hand with Inter-University Council for East Africa. Let me end by emphasizing what Professor Kiama said, that is, how do we create an innovative culture in our universities, in our industries, in our respective communities? And all this will be achieved if we really become East African community citizens. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. It's really good to see your face. I haven't seen you in a long time. Thank you for your good comments. I'd like to give an opportunity to Charles to respond to some of the comments our panelists have made. In the process, there's still some really good conversation in our chat room. We have people asking, Professor Kiama, I think, please note this for your last comments, your 1 minute at the end. How do we transform the mindset of our lecturers to be more engaging? And I think Professor Margaret's team partly answers that. Having a continuous assessment change going on in the institution. But what is the view from Nairobi University? You also mentioned something, Prof. We need to become East African citizens. And this has been one of the frustrations that I've been having, especially even now that my children are in university. I keep asking them, why are you talking like an Australian or an American? Why can't you talk like an intellectual Kenyan? Do we have we defined the profile of what an intellectual East African looks like, thinks like, implements like? And I think what you're talking about is driving us towards that. What makes us quintessentially East African academics? I also wanted to mention one of the questions that came through on the chat is the issue of regulators. Are the regulators on point? We seem to be pushing. We seem to know what we want to do in policy, but why are we not executing? Why are we not changing our curriculum design? Why are we not changing our ability to move from lecturers to facilitators? What are the things that are stopping us? How is a regulator either confining us or enabling us to actually move into reshaping higher education in East Africa? So I'd like to give an opportunity to Charles. I'll give you 3 minutes to just make mention on what you have heard back from the panelists and then we'll go to the question and answer time. I would like to encourage all the panelists to click on your chat button at the bottom of your page, review some of the questions that are being asked, and pick one or two that are relevant to you. If not, I can be able to direct the questions to you. Charles?
Boy, thank you very much. I'll try and be very brief. Firstly, thanks for all the responses. I really appreciated them, and thanks to the people in the chat rooms. As you rightly said a second ago, there's a whole string of very important points that have been made. I'll just go through them quickly. Firstly, that range of issues around imposter syndrome, colonial system of education, intellectual imperialism. This is a very big point, and it's why I emphasized the question of Africa in my first research slide. I think the only answer to that is for Africa to develop its own interpretation, its own explanation, its own values in that system. It won't be enough simply to criticize the way the American systems, the British systems, whatever happens. The criticisms can be made, but the core point is actually it relates to the point you made at the end there, Koi, self-confidence in what Africa has to offer, both for Africa and for the world. And that requires thinking about, as many people have said, but it's not enough just to try and tear down the rest. Second, I thought the storyteller's language point was very important and very positive. It is a contribution, and it is very important. And as Margaret said, the role of the social sciences and humanities are very important. Sometimes people focus on the STEM subjects, and fine, they're very important. But actually, the way our societies will evolve to the changing world is in the way that people respond to this situation. And that is through understanding people's behavior, social sciences, humanities, the language we use, as you said, Margaret, taking the storyteller history. So I agree with all of that. Women and youth being involved as change agents, I think is just very important. And the only thing to say is by encouraging women and young people to be actively involved, take responsibility at the senior level. The question is asked about how the employers become sources of resources. And the answer is first by paying for students to go to university and contributing to universities to educate in areas of interest to the employers, and secondly by co-funding research. On graduate unemployment, I'm always a bit skeptical about the phrase. It goes back to a planning model of education universities, which a manpower planning approach, which I don't think is really correct. I think the question that is raised to me by graduate unemployment is, are the courses which the university is teaching best suited to the economy in which graduates are emerging, rather than the other way around? Are the graduates suited to those things? I think it raises the question for universities about the kind of courses they're doing. Koi, your point about regulators, and related to that is the faculty being behind the curve in terms of change, as the Vice Chancellor mentioned, in particular in relation to online learning. The fact is, large numbers of people are behind the curve. They're looking at a vision of universities which is historic, rather than a vision of universities which is future looking. The solution to that lies in the universities themselves saying and articulating very strongly the future version of universities, which means future-minded faculty and future-minded regulators, and universities need to press for that. Flexibility, I won't dwell on. It's a very core point which everybody acknowledges, very easy to stay, very difficult to do. But the final response I'd make is a lot of people have commented positively on the points about partnerships of a variety of different types, and that seems to me absolutely central. If universities live in their ivory towers and don't partner, they won't be able to adapt to the future. If they do partner, whether it's with employers' organizations, whether it's with international collaborators, whether it's with governments, then you can see ways to the future. Thank you. I tried to respond quickly to the points, but I very much appreciate both the comments made from the panel and the comments made in the chat.
All right. Question time. I think, Professor Kiama, you have that first question about lecturers. Would you like to tackle that while I just summarize the rest of the questions?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I can tackle that one very quickly. I think we have had a problem for some time because of the way the lecturers and the professors have been underpaid by governments and not taken care of for over time. But things started changing somehow, but we are not yet there. So to some extent, the lecturers casualized the teaching. And they took teaching as just something you do in addition to many other things you do to make money. And as a result, therefore, going to this problem-based learning means that you have to put slightly more thought process into it and plan appropriately so that the interaction with the student is more productive. But they will prefer to pick the notes where they were and then come and read them to the student, or those PowerPoint they pick from Wikipedia and they come and they read them to students. So they need to be retooling for the lecturers, and also to ensure that everybody gives to the university the 40 hours that you are supposed to give in a week, not the 2 hours you come and you are coming from somewhere to come and they read notes. So it's really also in the context of discipline of the lecturers. So even the young people who have been trained, they have also taken over to that kind of mode of teaching as a casual, as it's a part-time thing. The main thing is the other things you do, consultancies and the other activities you do. We need to, if you choose an academic life, then we must work to ensure that you give the best that you have. The university scholars are actually restless people. And the minute you see that there is no adrenaline, there is no restlessness, then you know that the university is definitely dying. When I was mentored, I know that the professor, before giving the class, would not allow any other disruption. He would prepare to ensure that that class is the best. But now you come from another place, you enter into a class. So that is where the problem is. So there is a bit of retooling, a bit of working to change the culture to return to the university where they should be, all of us, not to casualize teaching and to take it as a side thing. So that's how I look at it in terms of changing the mindset. You continue to talk and engage the lecturers. And those who cannot work that way, then they need to drop off so that we have those who can be retooled. Thank you.
And I think this is very reflective, Prof, of the flip in even our teachers at the basic level. When I went to school, I think, which is not that long ago, but anyway. When I went to school, teachers were still the best. I mean, you were the best and then you became a teacher. Somewhere along the line, we got the mediocre people are now becoming the teachers. So we need to rethink the model of teaching and replace value on the teachers and therefore the lecturers and therefore the content that they're giving. Some of the questions that I've been seeing on the chat is how then, if we are demanding better teaching and learning, how do we reward those who are encouraging and engaging with their learners? So do we shift the weights of promotion? Do we develop centers of excellence around learning as opposed to teaching? So those are some of the comments that I see coming up. And I think one of the other things that has been really interesting in the conversation we're having is what is the role of career development, purpose discovery in our teaching of students, in exposing our students? Because I believe personally that if somebody has a purpose, it doesn't matter what career they're in. Their purpose will drive them. Professor Margaret, what are you doing at your institution to embed or encourage discovery of purpose for your students and also for your faculty? What is their purpose in where they are? And think about that in reshaping our education system. How would we then embed purpose in that?
Thank you, Professor Coy. That's quite a question. At Park University, how do we embed this quest for purpose by individuals? I think it's in the way one teaches. If the teaching shifts from lecturing to facilitation, that actually fast tracks the quest of individuals finding their purpose, because then they begin to excel. Individuals excel when they realize they can do things that initially were done by the lecturer. And I say this because when you teach online, there's much that the student does. They do much of the reading, they do much of the exploring in the library, and that alone makes a student explore beyond what we would normally do in the traditional classroom. And then as they explore, they are shaping their mind. They're shaping to know what they want to do, what they want to think, and that kind of thing. And I found that as we've engaged online learning, the role of the lecturer actually becomes a facilitator. You meet them at their point of need, you talk to them. In some of our classes, they actually wrote in quite a number of these past term, they said they don't want a collaborate class. Every collaborate is where we see them face to face, like in Zoom now. They don't want it every 1 week. They want it every 2 weeks. In between, they'd like just to explore the library, and they are responding to the discussion questions. They are discussing to the reflections that they have on the topics that they have, and doing presentations. Those help them to explore who they are. So I think it is significantly changing the mode of how we teach and knowing the value in another way of teaching. And I find online learning very, very powerful in that. Let me say something also on examination. Because there's a lot of work that the student is doing in between when they start and end the trimester. There's a lot of work. So Park University, we had to flip the issue of marks and value that we place to the evaluation. In other words, evaluation had to be spun on its head. What then is evaluation? So things like, for example, the students attending class is important. They come to class on time and on those ethics of life, coming on time, presenting and things like that. We also spin it in a way that traditionally it used to be 30% continuous assessment, 70% exams. In our policies now and our practice, for all the students who are taking, all the students, it is 60% continuous assessment and 40% exams. And then what kind of exams? It's a higher level kind of questions that do not reflect rote memory, but rather reflection. How do you apply this and things like that? And then also the 60%, how do we arrive at that? And I'm saying this because it builds on your question. How do you develop people getting an self-image that is very positive? Things like their presentations in class, their way of responding to the DQs, the discussion questions, and their way of interacting with the other students, they actually react to the other students' comments. So it's a whole interactive space that builds the image and the self-worth of an individual, and therefore they are able to discover their purpose. Thank you.
That's really good. And I think that also addresses the issue that Professor Alexandra was bringing about. Their individual confidence will then create citizens who are able to step up, have a clear purpose, have a clear agenda for their lives. I'd like to send the next question. There was a question on basic skills, basic CBC. How are we ready for competency-based education in higher education? Kenya has already moved to that model for basic education, yet we are still graduating Bachelor of Education students today who have no training in competency-based, how to have competency-based education classrooms. So are we ready, and what are your universities doing moving towards skill-based and competency-based? DVC from Tanzania, what are you doing in Tanzania or at the University of Dar es Salaam? And I would also like Professor Kuria, Dr. Kuria, to mention what is the role then of Inter-University Council of East Africa to move us towards reshaping East African higher education sector towards competencies and based. But Prof from Dar es Salaam, Ritinwa, are you on? No? All right. Who have I not?
Muted.
Oh,
You can just
Professor
unmute.
Ritinwa, you're on?
I think it's Mike.
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, excellent, thank you.
Yes, what are we doing about moving towards competence-based curriculum? Our current 5-year rolling strategic plan, 2019-2020 to 2024, enjoins the university to review all its curricula to move towards problem and student-based learning. I believe these are cognate concepts. In so doing, by moving towards problems, it means students will actually be learning while addressing real problems. Also, by going towards student-centered learning, we shall be building their confidence and therefore building also East African citizens, as we have been enjoined by Professor Jan Bajel. You earlier on asked me two questions, how we're addressing the question of relevance and how we are addressing diversity. I think this is the time I should address them. With the University of Dar es Salaam, since the inception, we have always been guided by relevance, not just to the problems or the needs, but also the opportunities. When we started in 1961, the problem we faced was lack of personnel to serve primarily in the public sector, and therefore the Universities Act 1970, Section 4, entrusted the University of Dar es Salaam with the responsibility to produce qualified personnel for the public services. 1990, when the system changed in Tanzania, moved from a socialist centrally planned economy to a market economy, we overhauled all our curricula to be able to train also for the private sector. Currently, Vision 2061 commits us to produce students for the global citizens, a global student, basically those who can compete with the rest in an internationalized and globalized world. How do we achieve that? The way we ensure relevance is through tracer studies. The Tanzania Commission for Universities guidelines and standards require each and every university to conduct tracer studies regularly, but it does not set time frames or periods. But the University of Dar es Salaam Quality Assurance Policy requires the university to conduct tracer studies after every 5 years. And this year we have just embarked on the next cycle of tracer studies. So relevance is at the top of our priority. With regard to enhancing diversity, this is one of the objectives which the University of Dar es Salaam pursues vigorously. When the University of Dar es Salaam started in 1961, it had 14 law students, all of them male except one female. And until 20 years ago, the percentage of female students was barely 25, but today the percentage of female students is 44% across the university. But also the university is taking deliberate and concrete steps to enhance gender balance within its staff. For example, with effect from this year, every year the university will be organizing publication retreat or writing retreat for female scholars in order to enable them to gain adequate publications for promotions. Earlier on, I mentioned that the university has established a University of Dar es Salaam merit scholarships. Those scholarships, 50% must go to female as a rule. So we are moving on. We are recording successes. And in fact, some of the successes have been so huge. For example, in the School of Law where I belong, currently 75% of the students are female. So male lawyers in Tanzania may become an endangered species very soon as a result of the deliberate steps. So thank you very much. If there's another question, I will be glad to address it. Hello. Hello. Someone.
Yes.
Can
you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And I'm done. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to respond to the questions.
Me? There was a little bit of a disconnection. Can you? Okay.
Hello.
Thank you very much. I think end of our time, but I would like to see if there's, I think we've covered all our panelists. Some of the conversations that are ongoing are about effective e-learning, the ICT divide and how we can bridge that, and also the issues of regulation and improvement and speedy uptake of new technologies and new ways of learning and knowing. Before I hand back over to Dr. Kuria, I would like to acknowledge all the people who have been on the chats. We have representation from Clark University in Uganda, from Kenyatta University in Kenya, Dedan Kimathi University, Ministry of Education in Tanzania, Uganda Martyrs, Laikipia University, the East Africa Commission, Morogoro University, University of Agriculture, Meru National Polytechnic, Mbarara, East Africa Rural University, Makerere, Nairobi University, Park University, Mbale University, Ritz University in South Africa. We all search institute belong to. Thank you all for joining us. Anna, I would like to say it's been my moderate conversation. It's been a good one. And I would like to now turn back to Bwana Kuria, because I think on my end, the internet is becoming a bit problematic. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing all of you again at the next conference. Mike Kuria, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. The question about regulators is still to you, sir.
First of all, you asked a very direct question. Before we go to that, I would like to address that question a little bit earlier. You asked what is IUCA doing, especially with reference to the idea of competence-based learning. And I would like to just offer two points. Number one, some of you might be aware that we now have something that we call the East African Quality Assurance Network Forum. This was birthed by IUCEA. This organization meets every year at least once. Unfortunately, this year, they were not able to do so because of COVID. Probably we are going to think about how to make sure they meet anyway, now that we have platforms such as this. But some of the topics that they have dealt with in the past and that they focus on with reference to competence-based learning, the question of active learning, the use of ICT and technologies. These topics have been covered in these particular teams. But as many of the speakers here mentioned, this is one of the most difficult things to transform the culture and thinking of faculty in places. So we don't see it as a one-stop something that's going to end. And it is for this reason that I go to the next point that we are doing. What we want to do is to develop like online learning platform for people to learn on how to do competence-based teaching and learning. And the idea is that we are going to have modules developed at a regional level. Then we are going to have experts trained at the regional level. And at IUCA, we are going to establish the platform, which means if a university wants their staff members to learn how to use technology, to use competence-based learning, they can request for that and we will facilitate. So we don't have to build these little teams in all the universities in the region. We have one at the council, and all you do is just tell us that we need this kind of training and these are the people. We establish the class for you, we give you the facilitators, and it goes on. And at the end, maybe that connects now to the next question that you mentioned about the regulators. I have to inform members here that we are very lucky in the sense that we have regular meetings with all the regulators from all the partner states. In fact, they are members of two committees of ours. One of them is quality assurance, and the other one is common higher education area. So the ideas that you raise here will be discussed with them, and we have discussed this actually. And I must say that the crop of leaders that we have with the national commissions and councils now are thinking a little bit differently, and they're willing actually to rethink that idea of how many acres of land do you have, how many physical books do you have. I think those issues are becoming dented, and they're willing to see that alternative. And so our responsibility is to engage them and make sure that that happens in the very end. So this is what we are doing at a regional level. So I believe I have now handled the two questions that you asked with reference to competence-based learning and also the regulators. Now, just to close, ladies and gentlemen, I would like, first of all, to just take this opportunity to thank you very much. This kind of a forum is not the kind of thing that you have every other day, and to have the kind of speakers that we have had today, it's not something that happens every other time. So on behalf of the Inter-University Council for East Africa, I want to take the opportunity to thank every one of you Charles Clark, thank you very much, all the way from the UK. Professor Gitahi from the University of Nairobi, thank you very much. Professor Banas Nawangwe from Makerere University, thank you very much. Bonaventure, thank you very much for coming. Professor Lembabaje, joining us again all the way from Kigali, thank you very much. We really appreciate the continued support. Professor Koi, thank you very much for facilitating this forum so well. We thank you indeed. And lastly, I would like to say that we are picking all the points. There was actually someone who is compiling all the comments that you have made, all the contributions you have made. We'll have that report. And we want to make sure that this isn't a talk shop. We'll take those ideas, we'll think about them, and we'll translate them into the strategic plan. And we hope that then will be translated into some of the implementations in the university level. Because as we have mentioned, we want our universities to impact the communities in which they live. I think the question that Professor Gitahi asked are very critical. If the university was closed, who would care? Who would feel it? And we want to move to that place where people say, you cannot touch the universities, they need them, they are affecting us. And this is the direction we would like to go. And for that reason, we are going to study the contribution that has come from this forum very, very keenly. But if you don't mind, I'll just mention about one or two that I found very critical in the contributions. The first one was with reference to question of mobilizing resources for research, both from the public and the private sector locally, instead of just looking outward all the time. I think that is something that we really have to think, put our heads together and see the ways in which we can support. And that, I think, can contribute to the whole process of the decolonization of the African higher education. If we continue saying our system is so colonized, but we are not willing to support the ideas that are coming from locally, we have a problem. And I think we need to set our mind to that. Number two is that we continue to explore more opportunities for partnership between the universities in the region. And one specific one mentioned was the idea of joint programs, especially at postgraduate level between universities. I know it is happening in some of the areas of the field. I'm aware, for example, we did establish a center we are calling Center for Mathematics. And that is being done regionally by universities in different places. And maybe more such opportunities will need to come up. Number three is to look at the ways in which we can make the universities have more impact in the communities that they live. Number four, to see how we make sure that we can effect a cultural shift in the minds of our staff members in line with the changing times, so that questions of admission, questions of testing, evaluation, questions of research, questions of teaching and learning can be addressed in line with changing times. Number five, the ways in which we are going to make sure that the African voice is heard on the global stage in terms of research, knowledge, and knowledge production. We have to find a way of making sure that that is heard. And number six, there was a question of this vision we are talking about 2050. How do we make sure that the citizens of this African community understand it and that they buy the idea and that they're willing to support it? And I think that needs to happen not just at the common person's level, but even also at the government level, because then that will also follow up the issue of funding. What kind of activities are our governments willing to fund in support of this 2050? And we're saying universities have a responsibility to make sure that that happens. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, is to ensure that the question of arts, humanities, and social sciences are not relegated to the back burner, but we see the ways in which they can contribute to a more robust East African community. I know that there were many other ideas that came up, and we'll be looking at them. This is just a summary, but I want to thank you very much and assure you that we'll be looking forward to inviting you again. I hope one of these days we can actually have a face-to-face meeting as well, so that we can see and integrate a little bit better. Otherwise, thank you very much and do have a good day.
Thank you too for organizing. Good day
to everyone. Thank you very much.